but we were able to stop the adversary at least getting to crucial data, to critical systems and so on, and kicking them out. And that in my book is winning. And I feel that is a big differentiator between SOCs that are struggling and SOCs that are making a difference.
Welcome to SAP Cybersecurity by NoMonkey, where we are tackling SAP security together, where we break down the complexities of SAP cybersecurity and make them real, relevant, and actionable. I'm your host, Waseem Ajrab from NoMonkey, and every episode we explore the threats, innovations, strategies shaping the future of SAP cybersecurity. Whether you're deep in the technical trenches or really leading at the C-level, this is where we talk openly about what it really takes to protect the systems that run your business. All right, let's dive in. Today, we have a special guest with us, our main topic around building the modern SAP SOC. This guest is not from the SAP world, so you might not recognize him when you are listening to this episode or watching it, as this video is also released. We have a very expert when it comes to SOC, threat defense, threat hunting, also an impressive background. I'm not going to introduce him. I think the best way to be introduced is by yourself. Maxim, it's a pleasure to have you here with us.
Thank you very much, Waseem, and thanks for having me on this webcast. So yes, I'm Maxim Deweerdt. I currently work at Inviso, where I'm part of the management team. We provide security consulting and managed services. I'm mainly part of the managed services team, where indeed we provide our SOC services. And I've been involved with SOC cyber defense for the past 13, 14 years. And I also teach for SANS instructor, and I teach the both technical SOC classes as the management SOC classes. So you could say that SOC is a big part of my life.
Then I think we have the right person to talk about SOC. I know that SAP is a bit far from you, but I think our listeners really want that experience and expertise of how can we relate SAP to SOC. But I do want to a little bit talk about you. I mean, you're doing SANS as a SANS instructor, you're giving those lessons also with your full-time job. So you have been building, leading, and advising, different SOC operations across multiple industries. What really drew you to this SOC world, I would say, or the cyber defense coming from the blue team world?
I think, as with many people in cybersecurity, I started off more in the offensive side of cybersecurity. Okay. So trying to hack things like you guys are also doing with the SAP systems. But after a few years, I noticed coming into contact with the teams that were supposed to be detecting what we were doing, that they had huge challenges. And a lot of them, I felt, were kind of stuck in a more traditional mindset. And so for me, that was it was really a moment where I thought I could probably be more useful on the other side, and I realized the challenges. And also, if you look at this from a worldview perspective, we are getting attacked, we're getting hacked left, right, and center. Absolutely. And we aren't really improving that much, in my experience, when it comes to cyber defense. Cyber defense is new. We've been doing this for the last, 20, 30 years. Network security monitoring tools have been around since the 80s and 90s, the beginning of the internet. And still a lot of those advances in tools and automation, even now with AI and so on, and better knowledge sharing, we still haven't improved that much if you look at some of the statistics of how long attackers stay inside their environments. And so there's still a lot of work to be done. But so that is what basically drew me into cyber defense, because I feel that's where the real work needs to happen. It's still interesting to find out how we can hack things, but let's also find out how we can make sure that we can prevent this from happening, or at least detecting and responding.
Well, maybe a follow-up question here. Do you think that this offensive mindset helps you build an effective SOC, or helps you with improving those detection capabilities because you have that offensive mindset?
Mm-hmm. I do believe so. A lot of the things that are part of a modern cyber defense mindset is knowing your adversary, is knowing what their goals are. And I feel this is one of the things that's often overlooked in many cyber defense programs. We kind of have forgotten that attackers don't just hack us for fun. They have a goal in mind.
Yes.
And it's up to us to try to discover that goal and try to stop them moving towards that goal. So So yeah, absolutely. I think having at least understanding a bit of what adversaries are trying to do and how they operate is crucial to having a modern mindset.
Do you still, up to this point, I mean, you've seen a whole bunch of SOCs, I could imagine, in your lifetime or in your experience working on this side of the blue team. Where do you usually see, or if you still see, biggest gaps when it comes to detection and response activities?
It's a great question because I could probably summarize this in one thing. It's
All right.
the SOC environments that have understood that we need to stop focusing on trying to stop every single attack that comes our way and switching towards a mindset of, look, assume that we're already compromised and try to detect as soon as possible the post-compromise activities that are happening. So if it's already, the adversary is already on site, and being able to detect the adversary and kick them out before they can achieve their goals, that's how we really win. And it's a concept that I like a lot, the winning concept in SOC and in Blue Team, because winning is highly defined for the offensive teams. They know what their goals are and how to achieve them, if domain admin or stealing credentials or whatever. And so in Blue Team, it isn't really clearly defined. And so a lot of SOC teams are struggling with, how do we make sure we're not just blamed for everything? How do we win? How do we make sure that we can show to the organization that, look, all this money that you've been investing in cyber defense and SOC, it actually pays off because we've been able to not stop the attack, because that's almost impossible because so many different ways of an attack happening, but we were able to stop the adversary, at least getting to crucial data, to critical systems and so on, and kicking them out. And that in my book is winning. And I feel that is a big differentiator between SOCs that are struggling and SOCs that are making a difference.
I like that, because I mean, historically, till this point, I would imagine in a lot of organizations also we see that security or cybersecurity, IT, they are more supportive functions. And their budgets, yes, we cannot really put a return on investment until, as you exactly said, you can stop an attack from destroying most of what you have built in this organization. So I quite like that. Before I ask you a lot of stuff around not SAP, but how to build that around SAP, I'd like to go back to your interest or you becoming a SANS instructor, because for me that is quite interesting. SANS has brought in a whole bunch of information when it comes to cybersecurity, really a lot of knowledge when it comes to that. What enabled you, or at least attracted you to becoming an instructor?
It's becoming a bit, or it has become a bit of a cliche, I think, when it comes to SANS and their cybersecurity training, that they always say, oh, we get real world practitioners, that are teaching these things. They're not professional educators. And so I remember one of my first SANS courses that I took at the recommendation of someone else, like, hey, this is a very interesting course. It was actually it was called, something like a detection monitoring course. It was actually one of the first runs of the 511 course at SANS. And so I remember after that week, kind of having a light bulb moment when I realized that a lot of the things that were in that course, we were kind of struggling with or trying to make sense out of, and it just all binded together into this. But this is the mindset, this is the vision that you need to have in cyber defense. And for me, that was so powerful. And especially then with having someone teach it that actually works in the SOC and has implemented those things. And we're like, yeah, I mean, this is just amazing. And, I've always been able to, or I've always liked explaining concepts and making sure that more people can join the industry by lowering the bar of explaining what we should be doing. And I felt that, SANS could be a way forward for me so that I could, spread the passion about cyber defense, and at the same time also influencing organizations around the world with that modern mindset. And honestly, it has happened already a few times. And these are things that I keep. I should actually print those things. But sometimes I get an email, from students that say, look, hey, Max, took your course. We tried a couple of these things that you talked about, and it really made a huge impact to the organization. And it's amazing to see what passion together with expertise can bring to the world,
which is
kind of similar to what you guys are doing.
Yeah, which is amazing, because I do believe, like, I do also give courses, but specifically around SAP cybersecurity for SOC who do not know anything about SAP. and then they start using it later on, which is always amazing to see. Specifically that, yes, you are right. I'm not a teacher. I sometimes, it takes a lot of effort and energy to teach within that, but coming from a technical background myself, it is quite satisfying at the end of the day that students or learners or whoever is taking your course really uses it inside their organizations and showcases that, which is always a gratifying, I think, conclusion at the end of the day.
100%.
Absolutely. So now we want to just go in and explore from your perspective. We had these conversations before, me and you together. Why is SAP usually not inside the SOC, and why is it treated as a black box in most of the SOCs that you came across? And maybe you haven't came across SAP being inside a SIM, but why is it treated as a black box within security operation centers?
Yeah, I think there's the more general answer and a more SAP specific answer to this.
Right.
So the general answer is that a lot of business applications, most SOC managers don't want to touch them with a 10-foot pole.
All right.
And the reason for this is that it's so common, and I've experienced this myself, and I've had many other SOC managers tell me this as well, where someone in the organization learns about the fact that they have a 24/7 security operation center, and they're like, let me just drop all my logs of this application that I'm the owner of, and you guys will monitor it, and if something goes wrong, you'll take care of it, right? But that's not how it works. And you have to be very careful as a SOC manager for scope creep all the time, because obviously you're already monitoring a lot of things. You have limited resources. You have to make decisions and priorities. And so business applications, historically speaking, have always been kind of on the back burner because of that. And also because business applications, if you want to have good detections, you kind of need to understand the business flow and the business functionality and so on. So it requires a lot more research there. And then I think the second part on being more SAP specific is it's such an important business application. It's not an application, but ecosystem here, right?
Yeah.
In most organizations, that it only amplifies what I said about business applications in general, because again, most likely SOC managers do not want to be responsible for if anything would happen with those SAP systems and then pointing fingers at them and, hey, but you guys were monitoring this thing, right? So we need a bit of a different approach than the normal log sources we would have in a SOC in order to do this right.
And you say, I mean, a lot of experts out there that are outside of this Japanese world, I like to call, they do see it as an application, and it is like if you look at it on how it behaves, but then you go into the complexity of it, it's a whole different level. So there are also organizations that do only SAP visibility, right? Or SAP detection. In your experience, doing detection only on the application or on the system itself, is that an effective approach to detecting threats, or at least responding to threats from that perspective outside your SOC in general?
I think so. So the way that we like to approach this is not too dissimilar to how you would approach other business applications. If you can control or if you can have visibility on the infrastructure layer, that's the first step. This also is a low-hanging fruit step because it's very likely similar infrastructure to what you already are monitoring in the SOC. So there's not really an expansion of knowledge not needed in order to do this. So that's one. Obviously, if this is some type of a SaaS deployment, that you don't have access to it.
Sure.
But then the second step would indeed be having a look at those business applications, understanding what would be, from a threat perspective, what would be things that would be always a red alert if this happens. And so those would be a few scenarios that you could build out. And then you can go, the next step is the more advanced step. It is then looking indeed, mapping out the business flows and then understanding together with application owners or SAP security experts like yourself, understanding where would be the inflection points. Let me put it differently. What would be the attack paths of an adversary, and where would we be able to get signals that would detect this, right? So that would be my approach, taking it in that order.
Do you think from taking it into this order, the SOC analysts that are sitting there with no experience of SAP, when you have a defined attack path, or when you have, as you put it, when you have those proper playbooks and proper workflows there, do you think that they are able to handle, without any prior knowledge of SAP, ecosystem or the systems in general or the environment?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. And it's a question that every SOC manager, when a new log source or a
Yeah.
scope increase has been announced, will ask themselves is, if this triggers, what do you expect us to do with this?
Okay.
And how do we
Yes.
how do we investigate this, and how do we potentially respond to it if that is part of the scope of the SOC? And so 100% here, this is not easy, especially if we're going towards more advanced use cases that are not as common. Maybe an example, if we take something like an identity anomaly towards the application, so suspicious logins or something like this is still very likely in a lot of intersection with the IT field that we know. If it goes into more specific SAP things, then indeed you need to have some more knowledge there. Now, I think this is where we're at a crossroads, where as an organization, you can decide, look, for us, it's okay that we cover SAP security monitoring with a specific tool that could maybe already generate alerts, and the tool helps us as well to get visibility into what those alerts mean and how they could potentially be handled. Or we go indeed the direction of, together with SAP security experts, we're going to build some of these detections ourselves, because then we can go even deeper, even more, let's say, specific to the organization in some detections that we want to create. And I think that the first approach isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's more of a, how far do we want to go with this SAP security monitoring, right?
And this brings me, and I think you did, I think, answer this question, but separately, and I want to really dig deeper into this. Let's say, and this is just a scenario here, you have this requirement right now to enable for one of your customers SAP logs towards your SIM. Maybe on a very high level, and as I said, you've pretty much covered most of it in different areas that we just talked about. But on a very high level, how would you approach this kind of activities with your team in SOC?
You know, in an ideal world, you would have, depending on the application, and let's say it would be SAP here, you would know already high level what adversaries are doing with those systems. I feel there's still a lot of threat intelligence missing on SAP and how SAP is abused by adversaries. So this is a bit of an issue, of course. So the next best thing is then understanding together with SAP security experts on what are the most common attack paths that they are abusing themselves, or that they have seen being exploited when they were helping customers with incident response, or even maybe with detection strategies. And then once we know this, the next question becomes, what are the log sources we need to actually start to build those type of detections? And then obviously the next phase would be, what are we going to build first? And this then becomes a priority question and a budget question on how far do we want to go with these detections. And ultimately, I think for SOC managers, it's important that when this is defined, that SAP needs to be in scope for the SOC, that we have a discussion with management and show them, look, what is the residual risk that we were willing to accept here, right? And how far do we want to go versus the budget that is available for having this in scope?
Which completely makes sense. I mean, what we see also around with SAP, as you said, there isn't much intelligence there. I do agree on that. Adversaries, usually we hear that they have, addressed or at least attacked an ERP system. We don't specifically hear about an SAP system, to be honest, to be tackled. And I think adversaries try to choose the easier path to access an environment. But of course, SAP has a lot of gold. It's a gold mine for attackers when they're inside. So to be honest, what we see is a lot of insider threats becomes quite prominent when it comes to SAP. And that's what how that shift from really, as you said, defining attack paths and then trying to identify those attack paths within your SOC operations is something that is definitely what we try to always do when it comes from an offensive and then the defensive part of things, which directly would lead me into your experience around hunting and threat hunting. We try to really implement, and these are more proactive now strategies that we are trying to talk about on after you have defined your baseline, as you mentioned, you have defined those important use cases that shouldn't happen. These are like a no-no, and then we do threat hunting. So in general, without SAP, maybe if you give us and the listeners a small glimpse of what is good threat hunting exercise looks like, or on a very generic level, what is a good threat hunting exercises? Yes.
Absolutely. So my My definition for threat hunting is you're searching for things that you're not already detecting. And I think this is a very important premise to start with, because I do meet quite a few practitioners that tell me, hey, Max, yeah, we're doing threat hunting. We have this list that we check every week or every month, and so
Okay.
even though that's a good thing, it's not threat hunting. That's what security operations is supposed to be doing. If it's a continuous thing, as it's the same things that you're checking, then it's what your SOC is supposed to be doing. Threat hunting is indeed really looking for the things which you're not already detecting. And so most threat hunting starts with a hypothesis. You try to see if an adversary would do X, Y, Z in my environment. One, has this already happened and we might have missed it? And two, how could we potentially, while we're hunting for this, come up with a new dashboard, a new detection rule, a new query, or something that we can then hand over to the SOC so they can then monitor in their time frame, so that if it happens, we would be able to see it. So I see it as a way to decrease your visibility gaps that you have, because there will be new detections, hopefully, from the threat hunts, or there will be issues raised on we need these new log sources. And at the same time, you're also validating internally that it hasn't happened. I would say nowadays, we see that the industry is moving even towards the next step, where there are these attack or adversary emulation, attack path validation tools out there that basically are threat hunting, but then at the same time, they're also performing the attack to make sure, or simulating the attack to make sure that indeed, are we sure that if this were to happen, that we would detect it or that we would be able to respond to it and so on. So that would be then the next level.
Interesting. Yeah, this is quite, I would believe, also very beneficial when it comes to SAP environments from my perspective. We try to really do that. Of course, it brings questions if we don't have the cybersecurity team or the SOC team with us, because we're directly talking with SAP application owners that don't particularly have a security mindset, to put it in a very nice way. So would you approach, now we finished with scenario one, you have your second scenario, you have built your baseline with all of these different logs. Would you approach SAP with the same mentality around these hunting or threat hunting approach, knowing that there isn't much adversary intelligence behind it?
I mean, in principle, we should, but indeed, it would be a bit different in practice. I would say it's again, and forgive me for making that allusion again, but it would be very similar to business applications, yeah, right? So other business applications, even though we agree that SAP is more an ecosystem, I know. The thing that we maybe let me approach this from a different perspective. When we are doing normal threat hunting, on IT systems, very often 90% of the findings are misconfigurations, are anomalies that turn out to be an exception somewhere and so on. And so this requires us, whoever is doing threat hunting, to reach out to application owners, to business owners, or asset owners, trying to understand, but why is your application doing X, Y, Z? Why is it using this protocol? Why is it, sending 4 terabytes on a Friday evening to this very obscure website? Things like this, yeah? And so I would say that with SAP, it's probably going to be the same thing. You're going to try to, even though we don't know a lot of scenarios, we're going to try to come up with a few, and this is where you would need SAP security experts. That would be one, but at the same time, you can probably try to baseline a bit a couple of things that are important in your SAP ecosystem on, when are the majority of operations done, what are the critical operations, and when are they happening, and then based on the data sets that you can collect from it, try to find any anomalies. And then those anomalies would be a good starting point for your threat hunts to find out, well, is this now an exception? Is this actually approved by the business? Or indeed, is there something other happening and we need to start an incident response, And maybe as a final point, I feel we should also make a differentiation between what would be considered a compliance issue and what would be considered a security issue. And I think that's very key for all the SOC people out there that would want to have SAP in their scope, is that we can define this very clearly up front, because the SOC is not necessarily, not in every organization, and the majority of organizations, I would say, is not a compliance checking center. And so if something happens in SAP that is breaching some type of a compliance or an internal policy, then that might need to be escalated to a different team than the SOC. So that's a clear demarcation that will.
Which is amazing that you brought forward, because we see that with organizations, dump it all on SOC. We can then make sure that compliance is met. We are monitoring it now. So if you have at least a few other sentences around that, because it's quite an important topic when it comes to compliance versus incidents in that aspect. What would you add when it comes to SOC is not built for compliance, it's built for the incident response and detection. And you can be generic here, because this is something that is definitely something at NoMonkey we try to also preach to organizations when they say, just dump all the logs to your SOC, you'll be fine and you're audit free, or whatever it is, right? So just a few words and to press this point for our listeners.
100%, yeah. It is a very important point that we're seeing that it's finally changing a bit. In the SOC landscape, because this has been an issue with SOC since the very beginning. And actually, it was more of a SIEM issue than it really was a SOC issue, where organizations decided when they are investing into a SIEM, this will become the place where all my logs go to die, right? So
yes.
A lot of the logs were just not used at all for the SOC. They were just there indeed for compliance reasons or for audit reasons, so that if the auditor comes by, okay, yeah, it's in here, you can query it. And so what we're seeing now more and more is indeed vendors that have understood this, and we now have this strategy where you have a SIEM, and you need a SIEM specifically for creating detections and all of the indexing that happens. This is why this part is so expensive. But then you can have a data lake next to it, which is more of a glorified data storage, but where we can put all of the data that we don't necessarily one-on-one need for the continuous monitoring, but are very relevant, indeed, compliance audit, but also during incidents to have as extra context. And it's this approach that we now see more and more happening in the SOC space. And indeed, I would say with SAP, it would likely be the same, where if we can differentiate between certain log sources that we would need for detection and response and other log sources that are indeed context or compliance, we can split those out to where we store them and who becomes responsible. And maybe to add one more thing is that, and I think this is a good thing for SAP security, because exactly the same thing is happening in data security right now. We've helped a couple of customers to onboard their data security tools, and so only a small subset of those data security alerts are relevant from a security perspective. The rest is indeed more like policy violations and so on, and so then for other teams to investigate and have a look at. And I do feel that if you can, as a SOC manager, because that's typically where the first question will come towards, when, hey, data security or DLP, we're going to need to monitor this and so on. I think if we can articulate as well to management and why there is a difference and how this needs to be split out, this not only shows a lot of professionalism towards the organization, but it also will help you as a SOC manager or anyone working in the SOC to guard your scope and not to overload everyone with too many alerts that are not that relevant.
Which is quite very well said, because I think if you see the change happening with SOC right now in general, enterprise SOC, SAP is slowly moving towards there, or let's say organizations using SAP are slowly moving in the SAP ecosystem. So they want now to really monitor, detect, create incident response playbooks around it, and really shift that mentality. I think we're still behind in shifting mentality between compliance controls and what to monitor, and of course incident response or incident controls and what is being alerted based on some sort of malicious activity. And I think here is where, speaking to SOC teams, we have this definitely separation between reactive and proactive SOC teams. And I would like your take on what separates those teams, knowing that SAP using organizations or organizations using SAP don't have a particular SOC specifically for SAP. This has never existed. This is where silos existed, and why our company is called NoMonkey. Silos existed, and now trying to also talk to different areas. But what does separate the reactive from proactive SOC teams from your experience, Maxim?
Yeah, so in general, it is that mindset that is at the starting point of everything. The reactive SOC environments, they're waiting for alerts to trigger. They're waiting for, or they're responding mainly towards threats that are happening towards the perimeter. Even though we know, I mean, you're going to get compromised. It's going to happen. Just learn to live with it. It's how, it's how fast you detect and respond to it that will make the difference. And so proactive SOCs, they have already, they have this assume compromise
Yes.
mindset, and they have already prepped for this, and they know that the majority of their detections, or at least it should be, are towards post-compromise activity. So they're already proactive in a way that we're already going to assume we're compromised. We're going to try to detect when an adversary is already inside, and then make sure we have the incident response plans ready to kick them out as quickly as possible. And that's a big change that I see between the reactive and the proactive ones. And I would say with SAP, it is likely the same, but happy to hear your opinion on this as the expert. But what maybe as an anecdotal, what we see from our experience, where did SAP come into scope sometimes with customers was mainly at the other end of things like a business email compromise, where there was the classical email that was sent allegedly from the CFO, I'm abroad and I need to do this urgent transaction, and they use SAP for that. And so this has been a discussion with a few of our customers as well, that look, if you haven't covered those use cases with strict processes regarding your SAP systems, then I don't think it makes much sense that we are investing a lot of time and effort into building complex detection use cases where adversaries would be breaching your SAP if you haven't covered those basics. So I think this is also part of that proactive mindset of let's look first on how it's mainly now being abused, more as an enabler, I would say, than as the target. And then if we cover this, let's then go to the next phase.
I think in this, to add on this, for SAP environments with this, I think right now there is a shift towards proactivity with some customers that we see, to be honest, but it is still behind. It is still lacking. Usually monitoring and threat detection, incident response is happening with the SAP bases. So SAP bases are similar to your IT administrators. The SAP bases have every single knowledge they have around SAP. They're experts in everything in, out of SAP. But I do not believe that the SAP basis has the mentality of SOC analysts and the approach, whether it is coming from an offensive or defensive side. So I always struggle with that within the Japanese world. With that, from a SOC expert, what would you enable if you have a group of SAP basis guys or security guys? How would you enable them to understand SOC on a very high level?
So is it, just so I understand your question, Waseem, is it SOC analysts that need to understand SAP better, or the other way around? SAP
It's the other way around.
Understanding SOC better.
Yes,
Gotcha.
it's the other way around. Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say that the most important element to understand there is that in most SOC environments, it has only, let me rephrase this. Being a SOC analyst today is a lot harder than it used to be. And the reason is that there's just too much technology out there that we now need to put into scope. I mean, to realize we started with the network, then we added, the devices, so endpoint servers. But nowadays, this is not enough to know. You now need to know clouds, multiple cloud environments. You need to know vulnerability management and how that works, because that's integrated in your tools. We need to understand identities today. We need to understand how cloud applications work and SaaS usage and so on, and then data security on top. And in some environments, there's already OT security, industrial control systems that are in scope of the SOC. So it's an ever expanding scope. And so the people working in a SOC environment, they already need to prioritize and decide where I'm going to spend my efforts, where am I going to spend my knowledge building, because you cannot be an expert in everything.
Absolutely.
And this is where I feel that SAP experts, when they're interfacing with SOC people, they should try to understand this a bit and understand that SAP for them, for the SOC, it's yet another thing that gets added to the list. Not saying it's not a priority, but for a lot of people it will feel that way. And so helping them to better understand as well, not just how important SAP is for the organization, but also helping them understand, look, let's cut down the noise. Let's make sure that we can build something that will not trigger a lot of false positives, so it will not become a nuisance to you in your SOC environment. And let us help you understand when this alert triggers, what it means, what are the next steps, and how we can respond to it. I think this would be my recipe for successfully interfacing with SOC people from an SAP perspective.
I completely agree on that, because You said it perfectly. I mean, you wouldn't really ask somebody who's always been a baker to sit behind your SOC. I have no idea where I got this analogy. I just thought about it, but something like this. But I do agree. Like these silos are what's I believe really enabling teams to even go further away from proactivity than reactivity. And the minute what we usually see, the minute we see that these silos are gone, really a really good shift starts to happen. Like SOC analysts are really taking care of those incidents or alerts that might be coming where they do understand it. But if it goes beyond that, they have that line with the SAP basis where they can support, because at the end of the day, investigations need to happen based on the people who understand that system, right? So, but perfectly said. Or it's amazing how well said it is. I'm now explaining. So before we start dialing down a little bit, and maybe this is something now towards the SOC, or what is that one thing that from a SOC team they can start doing to include SAP? From your perspective, from your experience, you want to bring in this new application ecosystem. What can a SOC team really start doing right now to include SAP systems?
Yeah. So we discussed very briefly that, I think the two strategies, whether we go with a security tool that allows us immediately some visibility with SAP, so an SAP security type of tool, or indeed we ingest it directly into our SIEM. If we would go for option two, then I think, honestly, I would spend some of the budget that would be allocated to this to talk to SAP security experts to find out, what are the top 5 attack paths, just because you need to know, like, how are adversaries abusing this, including insider threats, and then try to understand together with them, okay, let's look at some log sources, maybe start with a few, and let's see for those 5, priorities that we discussed, or that would be discussed during those meetings, how we can implement that into the SOC. And I would say it's better to have, forget about the 5, it's better to have one detection use case that is completely written out, which I with what I mean, that it's a clear detection. Analysts understand it, they know how to investigate, they know how to respond. Then immediately onboarding 20 analytic rules that people don't really know what to do with this, and then have to escalate to someone that might not be available at all times. So that would be my starting point. Try to understand how it's abused, and then really make sure you do it in a structured way, and that it's well written for the analyst to understand. Because ultimately, this is what it boils down to. And I see a lot of SOC environments making that mistake. They wave around their coverage and look at how many detection rules we have, but then a lot of the analysts just don't understand what to do with it. Even if you have AI assistants there, it's really important that we really write this out. And I think this is where the real intersection between SAP security experts and then people who are running these shifts in those SOC environments can really come together, so that the SOC people understand how a good investigation and procedure is written, and the SAP security experts understand the attack path. So bringing those together, that would be what I would do with the budget that would be allocated if this becomes part of the scope.
I think that is quite a really good conclusion towards what SAP, or to our listeners, is quite good message for them to receive, in terms of really start from an end-to-end of an incident that you guys can catch every single time, to expand on this. It's not about the quantity, it's definitely always about the quality of those incidents or alerts. Before I can release you from your duties on this episode, Maxim, if you have one final message you'd like to send out to our listeners, whether it is SAP or any security leaders that are listening, what would it be from your side?
I think my message would mainly be for the SAP security experts that are listening here. I think it's important to help the organizations that you're currently assisting, or whether that's internally or externally assisting, to help them understand not just what's the security posture of their SAP ecosystem, what the detection gaps are at the moment, or how it could be abused, and so on. Help them also operationalize this. It's not a one-off type of assessments. As you know, we want to make sure that if an adversary is clever enough, if it advanced enough to start to attack the SAP systems, that the organizations that you are assisting with SAP security, that their teams know how to deal with it. And I think it's part of this knowledge spreading. And what I like a lot is that SAP security has become a lot more public, I would say, in the past years, and I really like what you guys are doing at No Monkey and
Thank you.
spreading the gospel there. But I think this is really important because a lot of SOC teams they will look at SAP as really don't want to touch this and we're really not interested because mainly because they don't understand. And so help them understand, look at it from their point of view, help them understand that, look, we're here to make sure that you can handle this correctly, not just yet another tool that produces a lot of false positives. And I think this will already go a long way and help them to operationalize SAP security.
Beautiful message. But Maxim, thank you for joining us. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. I know I could continue on for another hour or so, but
likewise,
I really appreciate you joining us, and I hope you have enjoyed the episode with us.
100%. Thanks for having me, Waseem.
Absolutely, Maxim. All right, so that wraps up today's episode of Tackling SAP Security Together. Thanks for joining us and being part of a community that's pushing SAP security forward in all its right ways. Stay sharp, stay curious, and keep tackling SAP security together. And hey, if you liked today's episode, don't keep it to yourself.